Okay, good morning, folks, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are dialing in from. We're excited to welcome you all to the second Gravity Brainstorm, which is a production of Space Ventures. And this invite-only forum brings together founders, investors, analysts, and space experts and enthusiasts to engage in candid conversations and spirited debates about the future of the space industry. So our goal is to get our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the space industry, and also chat about recent headlines and developments, which we definitely will do today. There's a lot of interesting and exciting and frankly kind of wacky developments from the past couple of weeks that we'll chat about today. So my name is Ryan Duffy, and I'll be moderating this. And I am now going to kick it over to Aaron, just so he can say hi, and then we'll welcome on everyone else as well.
Hey guys, calling in from my parents' basement in Ohio. So if you looks a little bit weird or different, that's why. And I'm running on very little sleep. Let's bring everyone in and we can just get going. I mean, this has got a crazy, wacky week. If you're watching Twitter right now, you're probably trying to figure out what's going on with the world. If we're going to have superconductors and everything's going to levitate cheaply, or if we're going to see aliens first. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, let's kick it around the horn real quick for intros, and I'll start with Will, who's across town from me right now in Dallas, or slightly north of Dallas, I suppose. So Will, why don't you just tell everyone who you are and the 30-second spiel about Firehawk.
Cool. Hey guys, Will Edwards. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Firehawk Aerospace. We're based in Dallas, Texas. And what we do is we build hybrid rocket engines, which means our fuel sources are half solid, half liquid. And it's powered by our 3D printed rocket fuel. So our shtick is we 3D print our rocket fuel. This allows us to produce fuel in about 7 hours instead of 5 to 60 days. So it's a supply chain game and also has a lot of added cost and performance benefits that happy to touch on later in the talk.
And then we can go over to the other propulsion guys, because we have co-founders on. So Ian or Jeff, whichever one of you wants to go first, and then the second one can take it, pick up the baton.
Hey, I'm happy to jump in. My name is Ian Porback. I have a background in the startup world, as well as in propulsion engineering in the space industry. So I spent about 4 years in consumer packaged goods. I was an early employee at a company called Body Armor, which was acquired by Coca-Cola. Made my transition into the space world with a master's in aerospace engineering at Stanford. And since that time, I've been a propulsion engineer, currently a co-founder of Portal Space Systems, a company doing in-space maneuverability and mobility. And my co-founder, Jeff Thornburg, is on the line as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And thanks, Ryan and Aaron. Jeff Thornburg, I'm a 28-year veteran of the aerospace industry. Was an active duty officer at the beginning of my career, worked at the research labs, focused on propulsion, worked for Aerojet, NASA. I spent 5 years at SpaceX, where I was the VP of propulsion engineering at SpaceX. I've worked in humanoid robotics. I've helped Amazon Kuiper scale their program, and now co-founder with Ian at Portal, focused on high delta V and space mobility issues for various customers. And so we're very excited about bringing that technology to the industry. So good morning.
And then we also have Cole and Orbital Cole. Hey Cole. And he was with us last time, the co-founder of Orbital Composites, and Sam Corris from ARC. And I actually want to bring you two in a sec to discuss this. But first, if we can cue up the superconductor news. So basically, if you're not terminally online, or you're not like super deep in tech Twitter, let me catch you up to speed on this. A paper was released this week from South Korean physicists claiming to have discovered, created like the first room temperature ambient superconductor made out of a material, lead-based material called LK99, and it's said to perfectly conduct electricity at room temperature and standard pressure. So this could be a big deal. It's something that has eluded physicists for decades, and folks on Twitter are definitely really excited about this and cheering it on. But there's definitely some skepticism in the physics community. So I want to open the discussion here because this is Gravity Brainstorm is all about free flowing conversation and reacting to the latest. Sam, you have any thoughts on this? Like, what's
Yeah.
Ark's kind of immediate reaction been here?
I just came from another brainstorm where we touched on this. I think the biggest win for this is open science, and this was kind of our takeaway, right? Like a paper was published in a Korean journal, and I don't think anyone read it. And then it seems there was infighting amongst the team, and someone published it on archive, and then that like sparked a lot of people's interest. Got picked up on Twitter. The process is fairly straightforward. So it's like all the websites where you could buy these materials crashed because you have people trying to replicate it. You have scientists from MIT who are flying over to meet with the team to try and replicate it. So biggest win is for open science and the scientific method. It seems, at least as of now, right, the right take is, we'll wait and see because everyone's going to try and replicate it. If the indications are right, then it seems like it's more likely an example of diamagnetism at room temperature, which is still potentially interesting. If it was a superconductor, then this would be like the biggest moment in history, and the world would change as we know it, and that would be very exciting.
And by the way, is it Andrew McClip? Who's the guy that's like Varda Space? That's like currently like.
I think we have some visuals of that as well.
I'm following that. I mean, it looks like some of the people. But by the way, just a real quick note off to the side. We're using StreamYard now. There's like a maximum number of people that can be like on at any given point in time. So there'll be people coming in and out, trying not to get too distracted. I know I will. So what are we looking at here, Ryan?
This is Varda. Like this is Varda trying to replicate it, and they've kind of been, I guess, around the clock if you consider that they're also, they're working on their day job, but also, doing this nights and weekends. So yeah, this is from one of the tweets that they had this week, but it's definitely, if nothing else, I would think that this is probably a pretty effective recruiting tool for them. Cole, you have composites in your company's name. I don't know how dialed into all this superconductor stuff you've been, but curious what you make of all of it, if anything.
Yeah, I'd love to see some wire. It's one thing to have a brick, but if we can manufacture a durable product, that's definitely super useful. So yeah, it's usually about form factor, right? Like building graphene can be kind of easy when you take Scotch tape and you put it together and you pull it apart like that, you get graphene. But building a continuous sheet, that's huge, is the problem. So yeah, I'm not sure what the physical properties are that allow superconductivity with this material, but if we can get that property to extend for a mile and a continuous piece of wire that's not going to break when you bend it, then that's a huge breakthrough for the world. Sure, I'd like to see some wire.
Show me the wire. What about from all the propulsion guys? The three of you. Anyone? Again, this is all pretty new and it's speculative. But what y'all have any thoughts on this?
Guys, I'm neither a Twitter nor superconductor expert, so I'm just going to enjoy listening to you guys talk.
Yeah, this is one of those things like anytime the Holy Grail appears, I think there's always a healthy dose of skepticism required. But hey, we've got people chasing it. I think the proof will be, I think the implications are massive across multiple industries. One, if this is true, and two, if it can be turned into something useful through a manufacturing means like tape or other superconductor wire, obviously. So I think this would be interesting. Yet I don't know. I'm from Missouri, the show me state, so I definitely want to see. I want to see it replicated before I get too excited.
I think
Here's
there's
a
this
random.
kind of
Well, I just want to random thing because you actually from Missouri, Jeff, or is that just my dad? It says that all the time, and he's not from Missouri on random stuff. But you are from Missouri.
Born in Kansas City, Missouri. Yep.
There you go. Awesome. I'm my family's in Ohio. It's relatively recent, so I'm learning all sorts of like farmer things. I found there's this company called Rural King. It's like a tractor supply. You ever heard of this thing? Okay, I didn't even know it was a thing. That sounds crazy to me. I thought it was like, I don't know, an event or something when I first heard it. So I'm loving all this farm stuff right now. Sorry to distract us. Cole, were you coming up on saying something relevant?
yeah, I mean, if you, the other thing is if you can make it very, very small, right? Like if you can have that process work and integrate with semiconductor processes and other ways that you make chips, then you're starting to look at lowering the heat requirement or the heat generation just for having your chips. If you can get that number to go down, you get more power in a smaller place. So that would also be useful.
So here's a question that is like so layered with variables and hypotheses that it probably is meaningless. But let's assume that we do what you guys are saying so far, which is it's actually real. It's not diamagnetic. It's actually a superconductor. And you can get it to some kind of useful form factor. And there's an if there, like what's the most likely useful form factor first, maybe. But what do we think is the first thing that really starts to change if this is a thing? And I'm putting the investor hat on thinking about this, but we can also put a space lens to it. Is it chips or is there a whole nother process they have to figure out first, to really start to see that happen? Just curious.
I think integrating with the microprocessor world is the best way to get a huge return. I mean, you could replace the transmission lines from a power plant, but that's only better, right? That's not a revolution. That's just better stuff. But you integrate superconductors with semiconductors, and yeah, that's a revolution. That'll be crazy what happens in the microprocessor world, and in one generation also.
Amalak, welcome. I'm gonna toss this over to you. We've been talking about ruminating on the superconductor news or potential development. We'll see. It sounds like it's replicatable or not replicatable. Replicatable. That's a tough word on the scale of like weeks or months. So, have you been following all of that?
Honestly, not directly, but we have been thinking about superconductors in general for a while. I just adding to what Cole was saying, right? It's important to look for overlaps and also the exponential arcs that can change the trajectory. And usually that means that you're not inventing something that is far out here and does not integrate into the rest of the ecosystem. So, and these are the points that are very much lost many times. There needs to be a reason, there needs to be a goal. These projects hit dead ends when there's not a clear goal of a potential end products, not just one product, right? So our semiconductors have hit a limit. right? You can only build the most advanced process in Taiwan because the world can only afford one factory that expensive. I mean, that's the real reason, right? So you're really hitting the process limit. And what are the things that are going to shake that up? That can advance dramatically the compute capability. Uh, with the AI revolution, the demand for compute has gone up exponentially overnight, so to speak, which is why NVIDIA is now $1 trillion company. Good for me because I own a little bit of stock. But the thing is, the important thing is that if the compute is growing exponentially, the demand side, how is the supply side going to change? So now it's putting a lot of pressure on the supply side to find ways to not incrementally improve, but something that can dramatically improve the throughput. So in-space manufacturing of whether it's semiconductors or whether it's superconductors needs to sort of keep that in mind, right? Like, go after disruptive things like that.
That reminds me. I'm gonna switch gears only partially, but that's like the Elon line, right? Like the factory is the product. Will, why don't you tell folks about what you all are doing down the road from me, like 10 miles north? And I actually had the opportunity to come visit you on Monday. So I think that in a lot of ways what you're doing is pretty interesting and a big opportunity for the United States, aerospace and defense industrial supply base, which is strained right now, to put it gently.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. So our focus at Firehawk, we're building hybrid rocket engines. The cool thing about our solid rocket motor or hybrid is, unlike traditional solid, we have the ability to throttle, turn off, and restart our engine mid-flight. So you're allowed to have an engine that can take off, turn off, go into a glide phase that increases its range and increases its mobility, and turn back on as necessary. Now, we thought that was our big win, the fact that we created this engine that's capable of doing all of these things at a low cost, but also our supply chain. We're not dependent on the different materials that traditional solid rocket fuel is dependent on, like ammonium perchlorate. There's only one manufacturer of ammonium perchlorate in the United States, and that's a key ingredient to most of our solid rocket motors. So we're also producing our fuel in 7 hours. So our supply chain has just been, we've taken that from a matter of days to hours. Our production rate's just pretty extreme. And it's not a $10 to $20 million facility. Ryan, you saw our 3D printer. It was like 120 grand. And we're capable of producing dozens of fuel grains out of that every single day. And this is important because, like you said, our defense supply chain is strained and the world is a bit chaotic right now. Taiwan's really vulnerable. And if something happens to that facility, we're in trouble. They have a lot of key facilities down there. And Japan's vulnerable. There's a reason why Japan's about to become the third largest defense spender in the country. And Jeff, I feel weird talking about this since you actually worked at Aerojet Rocketdyne, but it's really strange that Aerojet Rocketdyne just got acquired. So now the United States, we really don't have any true blue independent engine providers that are producing rocket engines at scale anymore. It's not a great scenario, but I think it's an amazing opportunity for these younger engine companies who are building up their facilities, building up their technology, and doing things slightly differently to take a huge chunk of a really big market. So our goal is to create this next great American defense company. And as we expand in defense, we have really storable fuel that works great for in space as well. So the ability to throttle, turn off, and restart is pretty key for maneuvering satellites and lunar landers, and I definitely want to get there. Let's see, I guess, Sam. Yeah. So you want me to do these questions as they pop in?
Yeah, I can ask it. Just wondering, one, I've know there are other companies out there, but just what are you using to start and restart on a consistent basis, and then what allows you to actually do the throttling?
Yeah, so hybrid rocket engines aren't new. They've been around for decades. And it's the fact that we keep our oxidizer and our fuel grain separate that allows us to throttle. We flow nitrous oxide directly to our 3D printed fuel grain. And just by controlling the flow of that oxidizer, much like a liquid rocket engine, we can control the combustion. Now, why hybrids really never worked great in the past is because we always cast molded the fuel, which means we dumped all the ingredients into a tube, we let it dry, we had air pockets, we had, poor structural stability. But with our 3D printers, we are designing the grain down to the millimeter level, and it's highly repeatable since it's 3D printed. So we're able to design the exact structure we need after going through thousands and thousands of designs on a computer, printing it, test it, realize this is the one that works, and then we can print them in mass. So it's we helped fix the hybrid engine, and it's our 3D printing of the fuel that allowed it to be stable.
This is a little known thing, but Will was probably like this, I don't know, second or third space company I ever met. Back when you guys were in Melbourne, Florida.
Yeah, we got Mexican food that one time down there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that was years ago.
This is before you guys getting kind of shifting a bit more. It was a bit more space at that point, and now it's a bit more defense oriented. But I think this is. I don't want to control the segue, Ryan, but I have a question as it relates to defense, this is a bit more where we're talking. One of the focus areas for this conversation, which is one of the reasons we want to talk to Will and obviously others on here who have defense kind of background. But when you're thinking about investing, you're thinking about like customer bases and all this other stuff. And there's all sorts of people that are concerned about people that only sell the defense. And that used to be a bigger concern 5 years ago than today. It's like, defense is the cool thing to have as a customer. But what strikes me interesting, you went from, hey, we're going to do this stuff for space hybrid rocket, because I saw that back in the day. Now it's like really, really fixated on defense. And I think that's because I'm reading between the lines, but I want to get your input. The value propositions really line up. Like the idea that defense is thinking highly repeatable, being able to have high redundancy, things that you hear defense buyers and some of the accelerators and stuff talk about all the time when they're thinking about buying stuff from suppliers, which is kind of what really fits what you guys are doing, right? Highly repeatable, scalable, it's high redundancy, and obviously there's an actual rockets component to this whole thing. But curious your thoughts like on trends and in switching from potential space kind of customers versus like the brain that talks, to a space customer or potential space customer versus defense. And obviously there's like Space Force, which is kind of both, these kind of things. And curious what you're, how you're going through that as a founder and making sales pitches.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, whether they want to believe it or not, every space company is a defense company, every single one. So you guys, they should be prepared to talk to defense from space. The reason we shifted to defense was we started to see that need just grow exponentially. I think space is going to be a huge market. I'm really excited about that, but the USA is already spending almost $1 trillion a year on defense needs. And the trend that we started to see, prior to Ukraine, the ideal process was, we need a rocket motor that can fly 80 miles, and it's okay if that thing takes 16 months to finally get into the customer's hands and cost so much money. That was a trend. So we needed the highest performing Gimler you can find. That's not the case anymore. So what the military it wants, and what even some of these primes are now looking at, is a gimbler that can fly 20 miles, but it took 6 months to build 100 of them. So they're going more for bulk, less for performance, even though we're really excited about our performance capabilities. But I'm starting to see all of these startups stop pitching their new innovative technologies and the capabilities that they're able to provide that legacy companies couldn't. And it's more a supply chain game. There's so many really great defense companies that are getting started saying, listen, we will build you much faster, much quicker, and much more in bulk this product than what you will get from a prime. And it's much more disposable. It's not going to cost you like an Iron Dome missile is like $150K per interceptor right now. It's pretty expensive, and we they use a lot of them. So they're looking for bulk and cost savings, and that just fit really well for us. Now on the space side, it's not a quantity game. It really is a quality game, and so it's just two different business models. But I think both work really, really well. We are refining our product every single day. We have a lot of contracts that we're working on, and these contracts that we're doing on the defense side are only going to make our space product better down the road, which we're really excited to tackle. So you just got to learn.
Is anyone else hearing that
Yeah.
trend, that like the supply side, supply chain thing? I mean, I've heard it before. This isn't the first time I've heard it, but I'm curious, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and offer maybe some tangential comments and maybe some others counter ones that, what I'm seeing is that on the defense side, there's needs. But I've been around the Air Force in particular for almost 30 years now, and the same problems still exist. Acquisition is still broken. It can't move quickly. And they're now, like, in the post SpaceX era, the Defense Department's waking up to, well, I want to buy services now. I don't want to buy stuff. I don't want to buy hardware. I don't want to buy components. I want you to give me my end result. And there's a big disconnect now because the capabilities they need requires technology development, and they don't know how to get there quickly. And so we still have that traditional TRL Valley of Death problem, and we have a problem of, a little bit of talking out of both sides of our mouth on the defense side. We need these things, but we're only spending money with the primes that we have contracts with. We want this technology, but we don't know how to fund it. And then I think in the post-pandemic era, I think people got used to a lot of VC money flowing to space companies to kind of experiment with what technologies may survive. And then the Defense Department and different agencies says, oh, this is great. We've got a lot of VC and other money coming in to help do our development for us. And now we're in a different era, post-pandemic, post-economic uncertainty period, or in the middle of it. And you made the comment earlier about how all these small businesses are running to defense, which is true, but you're not going to get a company through the TRL Valley of Death on SIBRs alone. There's still.
Can you explain
VC...
the TRL Valley of Death? I mean, I've heard the traditional,
sure.
Company Valley of Death, but where's TRL Valley of Death? What does that look like?
So, I'm glad you asked, because one of those, I hate acronyms, and I'm now using one that maybe people don't understand. But technology readiness levels is a scale of 1 to 10 that the government established to try to evaluate technology. So when I worked at the Air Force Research Lab, our whole job was to take things from the benchtop to something almost ready for prime time, ready for space application. And so the issue is you have end users in Space Force and Space Command and the Air Force that want certain capabilities. Let's just use an example and say the mobility space. We want to maneuver spacecraft however we want, whenever we want. Well, the offerings that they have today don't give them that. So new technologies need to be brought to maturity. And the TRL Valley of Death is essentially this process by which SBIRs only get you so far through that development. And then between venture capital and program dollars and other things happening to a business, they're able to scale through that and get the development done so they can actually bring their product to light. And every company goes through this because you've got a great idea, space is capitally intensive, the valley of death is that capital intensive phase of development where SBIRs aren't going to get you all the way there, and you've got to keep grinding and pushing and finding alternate funding paths to get you through that process, to by which the government agency that's interested in your product will say on a program budget, oh yeah, we want this, we want to pick it up, it's mature enough now. So I think that's why you see a lot of space companies racing to get to flight demos, because that traditionally has been kind of the, hey, we're real signal to get money beyond the SBIR process, which helps get beyond the valley of death. But then I'll offer my own personal commentary on that and say that's not good enough anymore, because now we have small businesses throwing stuff into space on a rideshare just to say they've flown something to space, but it really didn't move the bubble on their technology development. So we have to have more value added demos that actually show how the technology is advancing, not just flying to space for flying to space sake. So that's
Can
all
you
kind of wrapped
break
in
down
this
the
valley.
numbers there? I see orbital. I'm just curious when you say the proof concept. That's like what, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, for a TRL level?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I know they're kind of arbitrary, but I'm just curious.
you have a, when you have a relevant technology on the benchtop that you think you can take into a relevant environment, you're probably in the TRL 4-ish zone. And then you test it on the ground in the relevant space environment, whether that's thermal vacuum chamber or whatever you're using. Maybe you're pushing 5, 6, and then you need to go fly it to get kind of that 6, 7, 8 and beyond level of maturity. So there's some agencies out there that I hate the TRL level system, just being full disclosure, because it's an artificial construct that limits business growth. Because a lot of agencies, they say, well, if we haven't determined that you've reached, say, TRL 6 or 7, we're not interested. Well, I can tell you that when we developed, Falcon 9 and the other products at SpaceX, we did not use the TRL level scale, right? It was, we're grinding in a different way to push this technology faster. We're adjusting our risk posture, and we're approaching it different than a government program. So the TRL level is a government construct that is not super helpful to a fast moving space startup, but this is what we're stuck with. So again, I'm bleeding into some of my own opinions on the TRL construct, but basically that's if you get something that's a really good idea and you've got some experimentation that shows it's a good idea to validate, you're probably in that 3, 4-ish zone, and then you can test on the ground and get up to 4 or 5. You really need to fly to space to get to 6 and beyond. But is that really the right metric? To me, is the bigger question. It is a metric. Is it the metric? I would argue no, because I think it's more about the pace in which the technology is advancing and the way the team is hitting off the milestones towards that development than some arbitrary assessment of TRL level. But that's maybe that's fodder for a future conversation.
I know Cole wanted to interject. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah, thanks. I also feel a bit chafed by the TRL thing, because sometimes it doesn't make sense at all. Like, okay, you're a software company. You've figured out a new way to use a camera sensor. Why do you have to fly that in outer space to prove that it works? That doesn't make any sense. Like, that doesn't mean anything. If you're building thermal insulation and you go to fly it, you should fly that. But not every subsystem needs to go to space to be proven TRL 9 in a relevant way as far as the invention is concerned. So that's one thing where you end up with these complicated systems of systems that small companies are making, and it's like 9 out of our 10 systems are like 10 out of 10, but like that one thing is a 3. It's software, but it's a 3. Yeah, you haven't flown it. That's a pointless discussion. So the other part is the military is expecting a lot of magic out of the venture capital community. That's not going to happen. And so they're like, oh, well, if VCs are investing in it, then like it must be relevant or good, or in some ways there's some signal of goodness there. And I don't think that is a good indicator. If you ask the different soldiers what they really want day to day, they're not going to say that it's venture backed. That's like, they're going to say this has to work. When I push the button, the thing goes. That's what needs to happen. So the VC community is being used as a leading indicator of quality by the military, and I don't necessarily think that makes sense because the VCs are not investing along those lines. And it's, oh, what's the quality on your product, and then invest. That's not how it works. You guys know that. So that's kind of something that they have an unrealistic expectation.
Is there a departure? Is like, because like I talk to VC and they like to look at, you know, potential SBIRs or any of this other stuff as signal the other way. So you kind of have this big circular,
yeah, I know,
this signal search that everyone's looking for. But you know, one thing that just recently happened that I think is relevant was RTX leading the impulse round, which I have my own. I have my own assumptions. I don't know any other information than what's public, but I have assumptions on what actually went on behind closed doors. But is this something where, you know, obviously RTX isn't defense itself, but obviously it's kind of an extension of that. Is there some interesting things here where maybe some of our CVCs that we all love that are always, you know, just co-investing essentially behind other, you know, investors, are they starting to, you know, lead on things and you know, lead on that kind of stuff? And this is a bit more of a, you know, hypothesis. I don't know if
and well, there's at least two founders in here who might be able to speak to the process with CVCs.
You know, I can't talk to CVCs. I'm going to stay a little quiet on this one, but like Raytheon invested in us. Raytheon Missiles and Defense directly invested in us. That was awesome because we can, you know, work directly with some of their senior leadership team, and it's put us right onto contracts. And I agree. I don't think VC should be the leading indicator. This is what's the next best thing. I really think something that primes don't get enough credit for is when they deliver something to our troops, it works. And that's really critically important. But it's a process to get an investment from the primes. And Dan, you could probably talk more to the CVC side on that one. So I'll be quiet.
Yeah, sorry for coming in late, everybody. Yeah, because we got both Lockheed and Northrop invested in us. As one of our early VCs put it, if you get one CVC, if you get one corporate in, like the question is from the VC community is, why did you have to take that money? Were you desperate? You're locking yourself into an ecosystem. They've probably got restrictive rights. Will anybody else buy from you? That kind of thing. And is your only exit now to be bought out by that company? If you get two, however, you're anointed. And you can argue them down on rights, which is exactly what we did. So Lockheed and Northrop have access to our tech and our guarantee that we won't undercut them on price only relative to other primes. So we can do as many creative deals with other companies as we like. But they have no ROFRs, no board seats, no information rights, nothing like that. And of course, everything goes away if there's a change of control. So that's a nice position for us to be in. But yeah, the reason that we did that and pushed that through as having both of them on there was because of the VC perspective on it. We didn't want to have a single strategic like that that would send a bad signal. And yeah, it absolutely sent a good signal. Of course, the round that we got those investors in was oversubscribed by 2x when we shut it down. So there was a huge bump coming on top of that.
So Dan, just a little level deeper there. Great, go for 2, 3, maybe 4 is too much. I don't know, but go for as many as you can to create some like competition. What, you know, as much as you can say, I don't know what your secret sauce is, but this is success. That was a successful round, right? So, what do you think led to that kind of? Was it playing it off of other VC, you know, more financially focused VC and venture money first? Were these guys like the critical, you know, things that then got the other financial led investors in? I'm always curious about like the timing and the kind of building. It's venture is almost like in rounds can almost be like building a house of cards that instantly solidifies, but like it just the right moment, and then it's no longer a house of cards. But at any point in time, it can be. So I'm curious how you're building that when you were thinking about building that round. If there's any insight on that.
Yeah, and we had a bit of investment before that round, of course, but and we'd had some phase one SIBRs, but we flew our fueling port, the Rafty fueling port to space, and then that precipitated us getting real requirements from the customers, so that we could actually build something that they thought was good to go, as opposed to our thoughts. That resulted in additional Space Force contracts. And I think both of these players, Northrop and Lockheed, were looking to play in the satellite servicing area. And Northrop's is a lot more public than Lockheed's. But if there was a chance that we would have the fueling port that the Air Force or Space Force wanted, then they knew they needed access to that. They needed to be able to include that in their proposals. So that was the underlying driving force from them, was seeing that there was a key bit of tech that not having access might squeeze them out of certain business. And that was the driving force. They came at it with different strategies, and we had to understand and work with their strategies and approaches. And it's definitely not smooth sailing. It's a tough thing to be dancing with those giants. But
so let me get that straight. That kind of timeline. It's you got to Jeff's point, TRL, whatever arbitrary number. You got some real tech that was proven. You got to a point where there's some contract interest, and then CVCs express interest. They don't want to get left out of the big contracts moving forward. They're in, and then everyone else is like, okay, those guys are in. We're in is probably a specific term, but they're in and they're there and they're showing interest, and that's when all of the double oversubscription starts happening, because
that's right. On the strategics also, they're looking that we have multiple touch points inside the company. I mean, Northrop and Lockheed are both giant organizations. They wanted to see like 2 or 3 different business units engaged, and one willing to sign off and say, yeah, this is important to us.
Interesting. Is that relatively the same between the two in your experience, like multiple touch points, or is it every prime's a bit different? One will go with just one champion, or one will go with they need 3 champions shouting?
They wanted to know that the business there was going to be ongoing business between the companies. The CVCs weren't going to invest unless there was a fair amount of interest. And we're going through the same thing now. We've got a couple of strategics that are interested in an upcoming round, and some of them have CVCs and have an established approach, and the CVCs get to make the call. Most of them, it's more strategic, more tied to the business. What's their ROI? They've got to do a business model, and that kind of thing. And the more touch points there are, the easier that is, of course.
Interesting. Sorry, I took that rabbit trail.
I'm gonna toss up a screenshot that I got today that shows like the more generalist venture capitalist strategy, and ties back to superconductors. I don't know if hopefully folks can see this, but the concept is, I mean, this is kind of a little bit making fun of VCs, but Ian, I am curious, for those who don't know, Ian writes. I'm going to plug your newsletter, space.biz, and has ties, roots to Stanford, but deep sort of engineering space background. So I think you like kind of straddled both worlds and could speak to both worlds. And you actually, one of your recent posts was about the landscape of venture capital as it relates to the space industry. Are there specific sorts of frameworks or strategies that more generalist funds employ that differentiates them from more of like the strategics or the space first investors that we've been talking a bit about? And this isn't just a question for you, but because you just wrote about this and thought about it, I thought you could riff on it.
Yeah, happy to talk about this topic. I spend a lot of time just thinking about, both as a founder, but in that newsletter, like how do you make startup space companies fit within the venture model? And I think there's, to some extent, the question still remains open, but I think there's opportunities to leverage some of the early support with DoD to try to maintain sort of venture-sized funding rounds that translate well from what other generalist investors might more be thinking of what a seed and a Series A, size round should be. And there are hopefully opportunities to leverage the SBIR programs and an increasing amount of contracting vehicles and mechanisms that the Defense Department is trying to use to fund the maturity of some technologies they're interested in. And I think like the Defense Innovation Unit gets talked about a lot. And to an extent, as has been mentioned, a lot of these programs have been around for 4 or 5 years and are still figuring out exactly what role they play. And you will occasionally see a public announcement where they're refocusing and so there's a lot of, I think, patience that's required by the entrepreneur to try to help these organizations sometimes figure out what their own purpose is. But there's, to an extent, the game plan remains the same from a generalist investor's point of view. I mean, the companies need to have customers that are having a really powerful pain point that's being addressed, and there needs to be a path to getting to revenue, and so the more that can be de-risked early, it's the same signal that investors would probably like to see in other industries as well. It doesn't really change. It's just I think there's opportunities in some ways to supplement funding. I think on the larger side, like if people have heard the sort of StratFi style programs, that's a little later than a lot of programs that we talk about. That's kind of the equivalent of almost a phase 3 style SIVR. It's not, but it's like that type of maturity. But the phase 1 and phase 2 style SIVR programs are often, Daniel had mentioned that he's had success with that. I think that's one of the ways where you can get more funding out of not just the venture community.
Well,
I have a question real quick because I want to hear Sam's take, because he not exactly generalist venture per se, but a bit more in that mindset. I'm curious, do you put a different lens on things, like when you're thinking space? I mean, technically, I'm sure there's a lens and stuff. I'm thinking more from like what Ian was mentioning, like this is a space round, it should be thought of a bit differently, or this is a space deep tech. I mean, it was probably a broader umbrella than just space. But I'm curious how you think about that if you're looking. I'm sure you have reviewed several different pitches. I know you've reviewed at least one from us. What does that look like when you're thinking your mindset on this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think for me, and I'd be interested, what all of you think. I think more than anything with space compared to other, web-based traditional VC things, is execution from teams matters so much more. And it's like, there can be great ideas. I think with software and other things like that, obviously execution matters, but it's so much more forgiving in, surface area of luck and speed at which you can fix things. Whereas with space, right, it is capital intensive. And so you really need demonstrated execution to get to that vision. And I think execution isn't something that changes that quickly, right? So it's like I've rarely seen a team that's not executed all of a sudden start executing, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. And same thing the other way. It's like when you have a team that executes really well, they continue to execute really well. And so for me, that's like one of the big things. Forget about whether it's a good idea and whether or not it's a problem in search of a solution in search of a problem, other way around there. Because that's like another big thing I see with space is, engineers get excited and they're like, this is perfect. And you're like, okay, but what's the business here? And so, yeah, that's kind of the frame that I use as kind of a very first screen for space in particular.
Or if I could piggyback on that for just a second and say, one of the other things I do in all my free time is I do a lot of work with startup ventures through the Creative Destruction Lab out of the University of Toronto. And what Sam just said can't be understated, is we still, even to this day, have too many space ventures that are in love with their technology when they need to fall in love with their customer's problem. And that certainly is the metric, I think, for any business going forward in this era is if you're not in love with your customer's problem and actively working to fix it, you probably don't have a business. But I don't see ventures really adopting that as a broader mindset in a way I think they should.
Can I say one thing to that too? And why Raytheon was a value add for us when they invested in us? It wasn't just an investment; it came with contracts for multiple of their active problems, and we were a much smaller company then. But it allowed us to start to think like this is where the primes are having issues. This is how we need to start growing our business because at the end of the day, it's a Lockheed that buys the engine. So Jeff, that was a great point. I mean, that was one of the best benefits we got was getting to see what the real problems are and building a company around problems, not just we 3D print fuel.
I think that gets to one of the questions that we got from the audience from Earl. Does anyone else? I mean, we've been circling around this question a little bit over the last 10 minutes or so. Does anyone else have thoughts here? Also, Cole, I know you've been very patient, so thank you for raising your hand. I feel like a teacher calling on you.
In the back of the room here, or maybe back of the bus. Yeah, I think there's one of the other things is like, what's the size of your investment? And then how far away are you from your product really? I mean, if you want to be a startup that does a geostationary satellite, or you're a startup that does phone cases, I mean, you don't really need the same amount of investment. And the proof points for the phone case company are much shorter, much nearer term. Actually, off of an SBIR, you might be done with your whole development, everything. The other thing, you need to go to phase 3. Actually, I don't. I just needed to buy one injection mold, right? So and to the question that was in the chat, this is kind of the same thing. Actually, I had a previous company. I was building infantry armor products, and when you look at like how the DoD acquisitions and sort of support of the veterans community and all this has moved forward in the war on terror and sort of that whole phase of development, it was all about force multiplication, which is this idea that you end up with super infantry. They know more, they're faster, they're in better shape, they have better equipment, they can see at night, and that sort of thing. And so you end up with basically supermen that are running around. But that's all combined with basically perfect air cover, right? Like you have like 8 layers of aircraft above you supporting these guys on the ground. So when you look at, starting a company in that environment, you can just make better flashlights and you're fine. And that's actually how a lot of the SBIRs actually functioned really, really well. You look at companies like First Spear or 511 or whatever, they've done very, very well in that environment. As we shift into what we're viewing as our modern conflict, which is near-peer adversaries, you're looking at network-centric warfare. Well, you want me to launch a network for you? That means the radio's on the ground and the satellite's in the sky, and what you're buying is the ability to push a button and the radios just work, which is always a joke. They never work. How does a startup go after that problem? And doing it without air cover, right? And so what you're seeing is like, why are drones interesting? Drones are interesting because they're taking all of that Air Force power and they're giving it to literally the guy on the ground, right? And so you don't need a runway or that entire baggage train to go with it. So the companies that stand to do well are now pinched between, on one extreme, like the market's already saturated for infantry products and these things are being de-emphasized right now. And then you have the other extreme, which is like, give me network-centric capabilities. Well, drones are kind of a little bit of both. You have a small network to the guy on the ground and this $1,000 aircraft that everyone can afford, right? And so the advantage of technology is you can build things that are in the middle. When you start to rank that against all these different funding strategies, like, yeah, actually venture capital can make a big difference. When you look at a company like Anduril, as an example, like they're going out and just acquiring drone companies and smashing them together and claiming lots of success, right? And that's because they were already the right size and shape. When we look at having a satellite company, it's a little bit harder, but the tactical relevance has to be like immediate, which is difficult for anything that's not just imagery. So Yeah, it gets complicated. The more you want to have a network centric thing, the more you need a lot of help from big players and all these large funding programs to go with you. So I just want to point out there's a yeah, the funding world and the scale of funding is really important to the size of your product, and I think that should be a valuable metric.
If I could be so reductive as to like break the space customers down into just civil, commercial, and military, Daniel, I think we talked about this a while ago, but this year in the upcoming 2024 budget, for the first time, I believe Space Force has a bigger proposed budget than NASA at 30 billion, give or take, which is a 13% year-over-year increase. NASA's at 27 billion. But again, that's the proposed budget. That's a 7% year-over-year increase, and I think that that's actually probably more of an aspirational target than it is likelihood or reality. So for more, and this gets us, this ties us back to the geopolitical theme, and just the degree to which dual use and military customers are still sort of in the driver's seat or determining priorities and shaping the space economy relative to those other two buckets that I described. Dan, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd love to be able to say that there's a commercial in-space economy that blitzes the government economy. It doesn't exist. Not yet. We're trying to build that, right? So yeah, it's right now, if you're doing a startup in the space industry, you've got to have the government customers. You've got to find a way, I think to Cole's point, right? You've got to find a way to dance with the giant integrators that are frankly the only ones that can build a complex system that's massively network enabled, etc. How do you play into that? You got to figure out a business strategy to do that. And you got to figure out how to get that the government contracts and show that traction. That's the trick here. Everyone who's looking at the commercial marketplace is looking at something that's still a little far out in the future, and it's a real hard sell. I think the investors also get that, right? People that are investing in this are seeing that the right now, here and now market is the government. The VCs are betting that there'll be a bigger market later, and either you can catch a significant enough portion of that government market, or more likely you'll grow into a commercial market as it grows by the time they need to exit within 10 years. We'll see if that's true and how many companies are able to find that. But that's the challenge for an entrepreneur, is to thread that needle.
So speaking of threading the needle, I mean, this is kind of Sam's point from earlier. That's an execution thing, right? I think he was a bit more on the technical side of that, but you're still executing on these commercial strategies and all that. So curious, I have a developing theory from an outsider who's just hearing much smarter people than me and people touching, the actual customers, just hearing what they're saying and trying to pull some ideas. But the concept that I'm getting at or starting to think, a theory I'm starting to evolve is that the commercial customer this difference between a NASA customer and a defense customer seems to be their priorities. And Will, you had mentioned it. Jeff, I think Cole, you guys had all mentioned things like this. It seems to me that the defense customer is far more closely aligned with what you think of a normal commercial customer would be, versus a NASA civil kind of customer where it's all performance. Is that a real thing? Is this, I'm seeing a pattern, but is this a real pattern, or is this something that is kind of made up? I'm curious, Will, or Cole, or whoever wants to jump in on this, thoughts on that. Is it more in line with a commercial customer, that kind of thing?
I think so. The military has a lot of people in it, like a zillion, hundreds of thousands of dudes, and then you have all the support staff that goes with it. So if you have a solution, a radio system that just works, you can imagine there's a large number of people that want to use that radio. Well, that's good. Or if you're delivering data, like satellite imagery is really, really still a very relevant thing. If you can deliver satellite imagery, there's a lot of customers for that. So you can sell the government data, from your sensor systems, or you can actually carry their network traffic, right? Those are commercial enterprises, if I've ever heard of one. The scientific missions that NASA wants to do and everything will show that the technology has reached a certain level and is of a certain quality. But we all know you're not going to get 100 of those missions, right? You're going to get a couple of them. So that, the way that my company has survived at this point is we sell science to the government. And we do it fast enough and in a variety of different cases. We're actually going through our complete systems level development strategy by chipping away at it through these different programs. So if you look at getting a NASA contract as the finish line, I don't think that's just right. I think you need to look at those as a proof of technology relevance and goodness that's done, right? And then you look at your military customers. Half the time, those guys look at me like, "What'd you do yesterday?" Hey, I know what you could do. What did you do yesterday? Because that's what I'm going to buy. And then I'll buy like a lot of them. And they'll argue with you about price. They will. So yeah, it's much more realistic as a commercial customer. And then you see GPS, right, today. Well, that's a military missile guidance technology that we all use to get around in our cars, right? So yeah, that they are the leading indicator of what will be the future. You should pay attention.
I do think there's a wrinkle here, though, which is you've got commercial customers in the space domain, commercial space companies. Most of them are nascent. And that's the problem. It's like you see a lot of space companies building up business with other startups, which, doesn't translate into a great risk profile if I'm an investor. But, the primes are difficult to deal with because they are slow and they're as bad as the government most of the time to have to deal with on a pace. And if you're a small company, you're moving fast to try to bring your product to market as fast as possible. So the challenges is your commercial partners and true commercial contracts are with other startups, which is helpful, but there are limits in how good that is. Primes are difficult to work with, but if you can forge those relationships, those are helpful but slow. The DoD wants what they want, and until you've proven a certain ability to perform, even if you have, their acquisition process is slow and broken and may not be conducive with your time to market. And then NASA is a much longer term play. They're looking much farther out. They're compared to DoD, the budgets are puny and tiny. They play a lot in the SBR game, but even more limited than DoD. So it's a really weird time for the commercial space industry, in my opinion, because all of the customers have their quirks. So when you say, Aaron, what's like a commercial, customer, I don't know that we have a great model for that in the space industry right now, because the closest thing is like this interaction between startups, because both are incentivized because your partner's trying to bring their product to market fast and you're trying to bring your product to them so you can unlock this for them fast, but you're both carrying a lot of development risk. You're not into a revenue generation mode yet, so there's a lot of risk to the business. Sometimes that's not attractive to investors. So I think one of the healthiest things I personally see is this um, very nascent relationship between startups or maybe more mature startups and other startups. But that's not always great to your investment profile. The government, I agree with something Cole said. I think they're a great proof of concept and a great way to send a signal to the investment community that other people think our stuff is good and works and solves a need. But I think the struggle is going to be when you talk about scaling your business is how many customers do you have? Who's got money in their wallet they're willing to spend? And is that on track with when you need to bring your revenue models to maturity to actually sustain your business? Those are the big conundrums for entrepreneurs right now. And I don't know, I'd be interested to what, Will and Ian thought about that too, because I feel like the struggle's real across the board in that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
The struggle's real. Could I jump in behind Jeff here and just push that a little bit? I definitely like everything you said. I think your adjacency to like the consumer as a space company is something that we really want to consider. Like I don't know anybody that's going to buy rockets for their house, right? So then who are you going to sell to? I mean, you have a limited number of customers, but I was just the other day looking at buying a Garmin GPS, and it's got like satellite communicator built into it, and like a big red SOS button that's satellite connected. So I think the more our VC funded products begin to look like that, where you can directly get it into the hand of the consumer, then I think being a space company makes consumerist sense, and then therefore commercial sense. If you're trying to sell space technology to an institution, then you are going to have challenges. If you're trying to sell space technology to integrate into a system, then then you're right back what Jeff was saying. You're sort of in startup land again. So I think you got to be careful of the targets that you choose. Definitely.
So I agree with that completely. Like our strategy is we bombard a whole bunch of different people. So we went and we partnered with Raytheon. So we got that prime partnership, and there are going to be other groups that we want to partner with down the road. And Cole, as you said, like the government kind of wants to see, and if they can see, sometimes they do buy, and it's an early buy, like a phase 3. But like we've had representatives for different branches at our test site. They saw engine tests all day long, and at the end of that, they knew exactly what they wanted to put us on, and we got a contract like right then and there, phase 3. So we had that, and then we've built up a big lobbying game. So we're getting into the NDAA. So we get money from the NDAA every single year. It's a kind of expensive consultant investment that we make monthly, but it pays back 7 figures annually. So it's well worth it. And if you do that all in conjunction, you use the NDAA to, to fund some of your RDT&E dollars. You use phase 3s to get a contract where you get to build to spec, and then you use your relationships with the primes. Because like you said, we only have like 4 or 5 true customers, but you have a product that's built to spec, and you can go leverage that and sell at a huge, pretty large scale to them. That it's a pretty good way to do it. It's a process. It's not as fun as selling Garmin watches to people, that's for sure, but there's a way. You just have to, you can't look at it single-mindedly. You have to attack several different fronts all at once, make sure everything lines up, and if you can do that, then there's some pretty magical things that can happen.
Yeah, I think
so sorry, Ian, just before it's top of mind real quick. Well, you mentioned lobbying, and this is I'm in the process of working through our own kind of strategy on venture stuff, and so more to be announced in the future. Fingers crossed. With all that being said, this lobbying thing is very interesting to me, because like the only people that talk about that I've are lobbyists, which sounds like they're selling something, but also some defense oriented customers. I've heard this now 3 or 4 times how important this is. Could you just articulate? You already said that how important it was. You gave us a number, how from a dollar perspective, roughly how important that is. But I'm curious, like strategically as a startup, because you've kind of seemingly, hopefully this continues the trajectory you're on, but it seems like you may have threaded the needle appropriately, as Dan mentioned, of going from technology, proving execution, and then being able to get substantial contracts, and then lobbying and getting large, contracts. What is the strategy there as an early founder who's not there yet, trying to get there, but also not blowing what little cash you have on a lobbyist prematurely? And is there an opportunity for a venture fund to support some of that? This is one of the things I'm trying to work on, right?
Absolutely. Some of our venture fund partners, they have an in-house lobbyist that they utilize. It's almost like an executive coach. But I recommend getting your own lobbyist. Yeah, it's critically important. You can't expect these representatives, senators, congressmen, congresswomen, and their LAs and LDs know exactly what the customers are going to need or know what's out there. So you have to go inform them, like, guys, this is what we're working on. This is where we can help. This is how, this is the impact we can have on the industry. And this is how we would utilize extra money if we were given it. And what a lobbyist does is they package that all up in a way that's digestible to SACD, Senate Appropriations Committee of Defense, or HASC, House Armed Services Committee, and then they start writing up essential line items in the president's budget for you. So, yeah, I know like a $10,000 to $20,000 a month lobbyist sounds really expensive for some of these startups, but when you get, say, $5 million in return at the end of the year for that, it's worth it. And too few lobbyists or too few startups utilize that. So I'm a big advocate. Anyone who I know whose technology is far enough along, and I know an extra 10K won't bankrupt the startup, I highly advise them, go get a lobbyist, because you have to go educate the government on your product. Otherwise, all they'll ever know is what the primes lobbyists give them.
Hey, this is a great point, dude.
Along, by the way.
What's that?
You said technology is far enough along and the budget is there. What is in your opinion, far enough along?
Well, it depends. Again, I'm not an expert in all things like Twitter and superconductors. You know, like for a company like mine, I mean, we've tested our engine several times at NASA. We're constantly testing it. We have a product that is ready to fly, you know, when given the right contracts, which, well, we have them, and we're going to do that later this year. So, because Jeff, we didn't want to just fly to fly. What's the point of that at the end of the day? We wanted to fly in a built to spec system, and so that we have something at the end of it. So I think once you have something that you can demonstrate and you can take, and not at scale, not even at a 10th scale, but put it in 1 or 2 customers' hands, that's when you're ready for a lobbyist.
Sorry, Cole, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to second his point. I mean, the stuff we've done with Department of Energy and DoD both benefit from the strategy of lobbying. I mean, we've been published, I think, 3 times in the congressional budget, something like that. So that's a good use of time.
I'm putting up a cool graphic that I came across in preparation from the 1960s for
that's so old. I love it.
Discontinued NASA nuclear propulsion program, and since that is in the news with the recent award, Draco Award, curious if anyone around the horn has thoughts on that.
About time.
Yeah,
we've had nuclear thermal rockets since the 1930s. What are you people waiting for?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, we had a program in the 60s, you know, with culminating in NERVA that did a lot of great work, but we cut that short before we really understood, you know, the engineering data to be able to create a robust system. So when we talk about long-term, you know, design of the nuclear fuel rods and the reactor and the interplay with the system, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to make it robust. But I do agree that technology basis has been around. Why are we waiting? I on a personal note, I'm a bit disappointed that this is the path we've followed. Again, you know, how fast is a Lockheed Martin really going to be able to move on a program of this nature with this technology? It doesn't fit the model that we've started to establish with the commercial space industry of moving quickly, challenging norms, tailoring specs and standards. I have a lot of concerns that programs like this continue to get bogged down by heavyweight regulatory behavior. We've tried to clear some ground in the prior administration with some of the space policy memos and stuff, but it's really not enough. So, you know, from a commercial standpoint, NTP is still way out, because the only people that are really going to be able to do experiments are these big primes with government backing that are going to clear the way from a regulatory standpoint. And we really need to make it easier for the commercial space industry to innovate around this technology to bring it to fruition, because the mass and the cost of these systems and how we test them are just too large. I mean, I've advocated for a few years now that the government needs to get out of the way and make it easier for commercial space companies to pursue this technology. And right now, that regulatory and political burden is still too high, in my estimation. Not to be Debbie Downer on the subject or anything, but
maybe a Randy Rain cloud.
Maybe.
For the nuclear thermal rockets, I think there's also a more general statement we can make. What about the aerospike engines? What about VASMR, the variable area rocket? There's plenty of other alternative rocket technologies that we're really not investing in. This is an example of one that's finally breaking through. But I think we could do a lot more with nuclear thermal than they're even attempting with this one. I'm glad somebody has something that's not a chemical rocket. I think that's a place where the investment community could make a big difference. And on the policy front, I mean, you guys could deal with a lobbyist a lot easier than a small startup can, right? Make a political strategy between 5 or 6 different startups. That makes a lot of sense to clear the way for this sort of alternative propulsion system.
I personally think it's one of the, if not the most viable future propulsion options. I mean, we've been at the top of the S curve, to use some engineering speak. We've optimized the hell out of our traditional engine systems. There's not much left there to go chase, and technologies like this need to be pursued. And as I've told friends on the Hill, if we don't do it, we're going to watch our adversaries do it, and then we're going to be sitting around wondering what happened. And I think that's, in this particular technology area, that's what's going to happen. Is I don't want to see what's happening in hypersonics happen to technologies like NTP, where we're sitting around watching everybody else do it and wondering, why can't we iterate and develop and employ this technology faster? Maybe it's because I'm getting older and I have a birthday coming up, and it's like, I'd like to see this stuff actually get off the dime in my lifetime. But
I mean, the Russians launched a cruise missile like a year ago or something that was using nuclear thermal propulsion. You guys remember that? Yeah. Where were we watching?
Okay, this is a surprise. No one's expecting this. I think this won't take us to the end, but I do want to. I feel like we never talk about it in the space community. So Jose, can you cue us up here with a video that will, like, if and anyone else who's not too much on Twitter, I would say that this has gone even far beyond Twitter. You've seen it in headlines, and it's made a lot of waves. So Jose, if you have the video from Congress.
You stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think everyone knows what we're referring to with that clip. Any quick reactions? Again, none of you knew that this was going to be tossed up, but bullish or bearish?
Okay, so I believe in aliens. I don't believe in anything that's going on. Show me proof. If there's a type 1 or type 2 civilization out there, we're done for anyways. Like they will take us over in an instant. And if they crashed, someone would have come and picked them up before our Coast Guard did. So that's just my thought.
Yeah.
And by someone, I mean a type 1 civilization alien, not the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. It's I'll go where angels fear to tread for a brief second and just say, I'll go back to my Missouri roots. Like, I would love to see some evidence presented that substantiates all the talk. It's the thing that's interesting to me about this topic, whether I believe it or not, is the high level of engagement by some of our senior political officials on the topic. So I think it's because everybody's so curious. Is there any there? I don't know that we'll know until, if there's anything classified, we wouldn't know about it. So until we're willing to declassify something that's actually proves that something is there, then I think it becomes just interesting fodder for History Channel shows and fans of Ancient Aliens, etc.
We have a question from Chris about Aerospike RDEs. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I don't even recognize the acronym. So, does anyone have a reaction to this?
Rotating detonation engines. A
Oh,
lot
okay.
of cool
Okay, there you
companies
go.
working on them. And I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot of potential. I'm excited to see what they do. They obviously require a lot of investment. I think this is where like the venture community is really assisting, because there are great companies working on them. Japan's working on them. So I'm bullish on them.
Yeah, I mean, Purdue has had a program to push this technology for many, many years. Stephen Heister out of Purdue, and so there's a great technical basis for this technology. I think it's going to be interesting to see, can it be employed in a cost-effective manner? Because when I started my career, we were still trying to push technology in rocket propulsion. Every program that the government sponsored was all about making the technology better, finding more and more performance. And now that we have a burgeoning commercial space industry, it's become more about some cost practicalities of employing these technologies. So, did SpaceX and others invent the rocket engine? No. What they did is they figured out better ways to make the design more manufacturable and meet certain price targets to actually realize the affordable access to space. So the question will be ultimately, does technologies like Aerospike and others really, are they additive to the cost equation in a way that they've increased enough performance to balance out their initial development cost and technology insertion? I think there's always a lot of hubbub about Aerospikes, but there's been a lot of research in this area too. And depending on how you're employing it, there's still some technologies that require maturity in the cooling ramp and really understanding the performance limitations depending on the length of the aerospike itself. And there's been efforts recently to try to fly some things to prove it that the government really didn't come to fruition on. So I think there's still some unknowns out there. It doesn't mean it's not interesting, but ultimately, how much risk are commercial space companies going to take on something um, on an existing system? Probably not a lot, but it does open up some avenues for startups to pursue it, and they have a technical basis from the government as a jumping off point. But I think there's still a lot of questions to answer. I don't think you can just say Aerospike is a great solution. It's going to revolutionize upper stages or kick stages or whatever. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, and I think one of the other challenges is like existentialism, right? Like if we try to put all of our eggs into this basket and it breaks, like our company dies. I got like a mortgage and stuff. Then you start making like not bad decisions, but tempered ones. I don't know. Maybe the venture community could actually put a fund together and ask some startups to try technology without having to risk the farm on it. I mean, if an accelerator and incubator could do anything, how about give us a second chance without having a zillion down rounds and all the other negative things that come with like actually trying something?
That's
That might be
wonderful.
helpful.
That's a good place to tee us up to widen the aperture a bit. And this is for anybody. Aaron, I think you might have thoughts here. Ian, I think you might have thoughts here. But the U.S. economy it appears to be humming, and like the latest GDP print showed a 2.4 annualized run rate for the last quarter, which is way better than expected. People are saying, Jay Powell might have pulled off the soft landing after all. And then to take a meme from tech Twitter, sorry for those of you that aren't, or space Twitter, or just Twitter in general. There's some limited signs that we are so back. But I want to hear everyone's thoughts on, and that's the wide aperture. But let's tighten it back up on what the next 6 to 12 months hold for I don't know, series forget the SPAC companies for a second, even though that obviously does very much have an effect and consequences for this topic. But from A to growth, what that sort of environment looks like for space.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at this. I think one of the kind of beautiful things we now have in the space ecosystem that we didn't have in the last cycle before the most recent correction is we have public comps for space companies. So the SPAC process did give us that, and so the kind of benefit we have is, you know, if any of these startups become successful, we know how they're going to be judged by public investors, and so if you continue past successful early stage rounds and through growth stage rounds, you know how you're going to be judged. You know the multiples upon revenue that are realistic, and so I think one of the kind of benefits of a full correction flowing through the early stage cycle, as it has kind of from late stages, you know what people are going to think of you later on and how you're going to be reviewed and rated, and so try to build a company that looks like what would be considered successful after those early stage to growth stage rounds. I think this is what everyone's trying to do, and we now have the benefit to try to have a model where we know what that's going to look like. And so if you can construct your company to be successful through rounds and valuations and amounts of ownership that you're willing to offer up to investors, and you end up looking like one of those public comps, I think that's what you should be kind of guiding towards. So I think there's actually as painful as the last 18 months have been, the whole cycle has given us that, and there's a lot of benefit to that. So that's kind of what I think about a lot as well.
My opinion differs a little bit on that. I think a lot of our SPAC like companies, they went through a lot of pain that they didn't need to. And when you talk to the analysts, like the people that are like paid to just do this and review aerospace companies, it's a spreadsheet kind of thing, right? I mean, there is, not much thinking about 3-5 year timelines. Like when they think about that, it's like quarter to quarter, tends to be 6 to 12 months kind of analysis. Most space companies, and if anything, they really shouldn't be putting that pressure to try to look like a public market company right now. I think it just doesn't make any sense. It really puts the pressure on private ecosystem, the funding ecosystem, and private companies to stay private as long as possible. And so, I think if anything, it's just very hard for a public company to be thinking about what's the next 5-10 years look like. Can you imagine, like I use Rocket Lab as an example, and I like Rocket Lab. I think launch business is not a great business to be in if you're talking from like a margin kind of, if you're looking at it from a spreadsheet perspective, not a great business to be in. And one of the reasons they're operating and trying to sell all sorts of other different things. But if you had to give, let's just say whatever the thing is, RDEs, whatever the next clear thing is, but it required, 5 or 10 years of development. The public market doesn't see it yet. And you had to give that to, it's not quite fair to compare it to, SpaceX, but, I don't know, Relativity, any other private space company that could get some funding to do that thing versus Rocket Lab that needed to convince the public over 3 to 5 years that this large R&D burn is going to pay off. Trust us, right? Like I do not want to be in Rocket Lab's position in that world, right? Like trying to justify this kind of like really long-term thinking. If anything, the company, the group like Sam and Arc and some of those guys are a few that do kind of think long-term. It's not necessarily the mainstream. Having said all that, I think you mentioned some of the growth that's coming and soft landing, whatever. Until the rates come down, we're still going to see cash, really tight cash. Like you're not going to have money floating around like it was in 2021. So even though it seems like there's definitely some optimism and there is money to be had, we're doing deals today, and some people on this call are well aware of the deals that we're working on. And you still have the conversation like, why would I put any money in you with the risk associated with it when I could put 5% with essentially zero risk? I mean, whatever that is, right? So we still have that pressure. It is still very difficult to raise. The more that you're trying to raise, the more difficult it is. It's an exponential curve, it seems like. And it's all this, it's this house of cards building, right? You get the right lead that's based on some potential commitments and all this other stuff. Then all of a sudden it crystallizes and you have this great round. It'll happen. I I have some theories on what companies like Impulse and others, when they're getting leads and all this other stuff. Sometimes you have to package rounds together to make it look bigger than they probably really were. Like they may have been a series of little bridges and all this other stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that there's some creative things going on still over the next, 6, 12, 18 months from a market perspective. Just a few ideas and thoughts that are going through my head on that.
I think you definitely are going to get creative. Can I say one of the best things that ever happened to us was I've never known a good market because I was a hardware defense company. So people looked at us and were like, get out of here. We were not touching you. So what we had to do instead was go build a business, go get contracts, go build like an actual like team and facility where we can produce at a rate. And where that's led us to today, we're at a point where, we can go out and raise our next round of funding in a year if we wanted to. And that's to cushion us, or we don't. And we might go a little bit slower. Now I'm gonna edge towards, yes, I do want to raise that larger round, but everything that we're going to raise off of that is because we try to build ourselves, like Ian, to kind of look like a public market. And then also like Aaron, it's going to get finagled a little bit because we didn't get a tier 1 VC to invest in us in our seed round in our Series A. We funded our company from customer contracts, appropriations, government contracts. And then yes, we did raise about $25 million ultimately, but that was only because we had millions in revenue that we were starting to bring in. So I don't know what a good market looks like. And I think as a hardware defense company, I probably never will, but we'll just keep building our business. And I think maybe some hype will jump, will come to defense, and I'm excited for that. But if it doesn't, I won't live and die by VCs investing in us. We're just going to build a great company.
Yeah. From a founder's perspective, there's nothing sweeter than being in Will's position of maybe I need to raise, maybe I don't. And that just makes some venture and stuff like that get more interested. From an investor's perspective, considering that risk-free rate and what you're looking at, like that's definitely something to consider, right? Having said that, the lack of appetite to take on risk has created opportunities. There's definitely opportunities that exist in early stages, pre-seed or whatever. A lot of like pre-seed and seed are still kind of exist. Your numbers didn't really have much room to go up or down. There's just not much there for people to really negotiate. And you still have all your multiples you're looking at, and people are thinking years, decades out, or, in some situations. And so that didn't go away. The Series A, like that world, I think when people are starting to get priced, if I'm an investor right now, there's probably some great opportunities there, because you're probably still in a relatively illiquid environment where it's still hard to raise, and you could probably get, but for better or for worse, the ability to get a good price when you're actually pricing around. So if I'm sitting on some of this and I'm sitting on a cash pool as a venture fund, I'm probably looking for opportunities in the space industry to price a Series A for a few companies. And if I'm a founder on the other side, I'm probably looking at as much of an opportunity as possible to not have to take it for as long as possible, so that you can demand your own price later on, right? It's a market. There's always going to be a little bit of back and forth and give and take. But that's what we look for right now, is companies that are piling in revenue, that have a bunch of different opportunities to do that. And then at some point, there's going to be some really great, things that come out of this cycle, just like every other down cycle we have, where, everyone's going to look. It was obvious you should have been putting money in during this time. So plenty of opportunity. Still going to be, until rates come back down to 3-2% in that range, like, you're still going to be hard to, as a company, to sell equity in something that's high risk. So that probably exists for another 6, 12, 18 months. Don't hold me to any of that. We'll see. We'll see where it lands.
Yeah, we'll have to check in on that in like Brainstorm 8 or whenever.
Yeah, you're gonna bring it up when I said I predicted it, and I'm way off.
I'll be ready. That's like the hallmark of the space industry, is predictions and then coming back and checking on them. But thanks to everybody who tuned in. Thanks to everyone who joined, as well as our three speakers who had to jump a little bit early for customer calls. As many of you know, this will be a recurring format, and we will be back next month. In the interim, if you have any suggestions for us, feedback, anything, reach out to Aaron or I. And thanks again, everybody. We'll see you
Reminder
back
of
here
the
soon.
Chatham House rules of this whole thing, right? If anyone was saying anything, just, keep in mind that it's okay to repeat this, but try to keep identities anonymous, or vice versa, divorcing identities from the content. Just a gentle reminder on that. We are trying to breed consistent rapport and openness. Chatham House rules are going to help that over time. So awesome. Thanks, guys. See ya.